700 years ago, a single man walked out of the deserts of West Africa, carrying so much gold that he accidentally wrecked the economy of an entire region. It took more than a decade to recover. He didn't start a war. He didn't conquer anyone. All he did was spend money. His name was Mansa Musa, and he is very likely the richest human being who has ever lived. Richer than any pharaoh, any oil baron, any tech billionaire alive today. But here's the part almost nobody tells you. The story of the richest man in history isn't really a story about being rich. It's the clearest lesson ever recorded about how money actually works, and why having more of it almost never does what you think it will. If you're the kind of person who wants to understand money on a level most people never reach, no hype, no get rich quick, do me a favor and subscribe. This channel is about building quiet, lasting wealth, the kind that doesn't need to shout. In the early 1300s, the Empire of Mali was not some small kingdom on the edge of the map. It was one of the largest and richest empires on earth, stretching across a huge swath of West Africa. And Mansa Musa was its emperor at the absolute peak of its power. He was also a devout Muslim, and the journey you are about to hear about was, first and foremost, a religious pilgrimage, a sacred duty he took seriously. In the year 1324, Mansa Musa decided to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, and he did not travel light. According to accounts from the time, his caravan stretched to the horizon. Around 60,000 men. 12,000 of them were personal attendants, each dressed in Persian silk. 80 camels, and every single camel carried something like 300 pounds of pure gold. Sit with that number for a moment. Not 300 pounds total. 300 pounds each. Ahead of him rode heralds carrying golden staffs, and everywhere he stopped, he gave gold away like it was sand. And this was not an army on the march. It was closer to a small mobile city crossing the Sahara. Every person who watched it pass understood instantly that they were looking at power on a scale they had no words for. The pilgrimage was religious, yes, but it was also the single greatest public display of wealth the medieval world would ever witness. Why did he have so much of it? Because at that moment in history, the Empire of Mali controlled about half of the entire world's supply of gold. Musa didn't just have money. He sat on the source of it. Mali's fortune did not come simply from owning a giant pile of treasure. It came from controlling the flow of it, the gold mines, and the trans-Saharan trade routes that carried gold north across the desert and brought salt and goods back south. People who build lasting fortunes rarely do it by owning one big lucky thing. They do it by controlling something that keeps producing, a business, a skill, a slice of a market, a flow they sit on top of. Own the source, not just the pile. There's something almost poetic about how the rest of the world found out. About 50 years later, a European map maker created one of the most famous maps of the age, the Catalan Atlas. And right there, in the middle of Africa, he drew Mansa Musa, seated on a throne, a golden crown on his head, holding up a single enormous nugget of gold. A ruler from West Africa, drawn by Europeans as the very symbol of wealth itself. He had, quite literally, put himself on the map. When his caravan reached Cairo, Musa spent and gave away gold on a scale the city had never seen. He handed it to officials, to the poor, to merchants, to anyone around him. For a few weeks, Cairo must have felt like paradise. But watch what happened next, because this is the whole point. So much gold suddenly flooded into the city that gold itself began to lose its value. When something is everywhere, it stops being precious. The price of gold in Egypt collapsed, and it stayed depressed for around 12 years. One man's generosity quietly made everyone in the region poorer by making the very thing they measured wealth in worth less. It is one of the earliest and clearest examples in history of a truth we still refuse to learn. Pouring more money into a system does not create more wealth. It just quietly moves it around. Money is not wealth. Money is a claim on things that are scarce. Gold was valuable because it was hard to get. The moment it wasn't hard to get, it wasn't valuable. And this is an ancient history. This is exactly what inflation is. When a government prints and floods an economy with more currency, each unit in your pocket buys less. For the same reason Musa's gold crashed in Cairo. The richest man who ever lived proved, 700 years ago, that flooding the world with money doesn't make people rich. It just makes the money worth less. Keep that in your mind the next time someone tells you the solution to a problem is simply more money. Because on his way back home from Mecca, Mansa Musa, the richest man on planet Earth, ran out of cash. Let that sink in. The man who sat on half the world's gold had a money problem on the road. He borrowed gold back from lenders in Cairo at high interest, partly to pull gold out of the market and push the price back up. The richest man in history, paying interest in debt on a journey home. Being wealthy and having money available are two completely different things. We have a word for this today. It's called liquidity. You can own something worth a fortune and still be unable to put your hands on cash when you actually need it. The person with the newest car and the biggest house, who could not survive 60 days without a paycheck. And the quiet one, who doesn't look rich at all, who could walk away from their job tomorrow and be fine for years. On paper, one of them looks wealthy. In reality, it is the other one who is actually free. When he came home, he poured his wealth into building. In the city of Timbuktu, he funded the Jingareber Mosque, built in 1327, still standing to this day. He backed the University of Sankore, and Timbuktu became one of the great centers of learning on Earth. At its height, historians estimate that around 25,000 students and scholars lived and studied there. Its libraries held tens of thousands of manuscripts on astronomy, medicine, law, and philosophy. Some of those texts still survive today, 700 years later. Mansa Musa took a fortune that could have been hoarded or spent entirely on comfort and converted part of it into something that kept producing knowledge, status, and influence for centuries after the gold itself was gone. That is the quiet definition of an asset, something you build or buy that keeps paying out long after the money that created it has disappeared. The gold, the thing everyone remembers him for, is completely gone. But the knowledge, the buildings, the institutions he turned that gold into, outlived him by 7 centuries. That is the difference between consumption and building. The richest man in history is not remembered because of what he owned. He's remembered because of what he built. And that is the quiet truth about wealth that no advertisement will ever tell you, because there is no product to sell you in it. In the generations after Mansa Musa, the empire of Mali slowly declined, worn down by internal struggles and outside pressure, until the golden empire that had once stunned the world faded from power. All that gold, all that dominance, did not make it permanent. Wealth is not a fortress you build once and then sit inside forever. It has to be understood, managed, and renewed, or it slips away, even from the richest hands that ever held it. Musa felt infinitely rich, but the instant his gold touched a real market, its value became relative to how much of it there was, relative to what other people had. And your sense of wealth works exactly the same way. It is always relative. The people who actually feel wealthy are almost never the ones with the most. They're the ones who defined what enough looks like, and then build a life that doesn't depend on the number going up forever. First, stop measuring wealth by the size of the pile, and start measuring it by control. Do you own or build things that keep producing, or are you just holding a stack that inflation slowly eats? Second, respect liquidity. And third, define your own finish line before the world defines it for you. So here's what the richest man who ever lived really left us. Not $400 billion. That's gone. He left us 4 lessons hiding inside a legend. That money is only worth something when it's scarce. That being rich and having cash are not the same thing. That what you build outlasts what you spend. And that wealth, in the end, is relative. The world did not remember Mansa Musa because he hoarded the most gold in history. He is on the map because of what his wealth touched, what it built, and what it revealed about human nature. In the end, The size of his fortune was the least interesting thing about him, which might be the most useful lesson of all. The number was never the point. If any of that shifted the way you think about money, even slightly, do two things for me. First, tell me in the comments, what does enough actually look like for you? Not a fantasy number, a real one. I read them. And second, if you want more stories like this, subscribe and stick around. Because the goal here was never to be the richest man in the room. It was to be free. And that's a very different game. The richest man who ever lived spent a fortune so large it bent an economy. And in the end, the gold is gone, the empire faded, and what survived was the knowledge, the lesson, and the legend. You and I get to skip straight to the lesson, without spending a single gold coin to learn it. I'll see you in the next one.